The first sound I usually registered each morning wasn't the chirping of sparrows or the distant hum of Havenwood waking up. No, it was the clatter from the garage. A metallic screech, a sudden thud, the angry whine of some unfamiliar tool. That was David, my son, 32 years old. And the only career he seemed to be pursuing was turning our already cramped garage into a scrapyard, a laboratory for ideas only he understood. Or perhaps only deluded himself into understanding. My name is Margaret, and for the past decade, my life has been underscored by this symphony of disappointment. It plays when I see Susan Henderson's daughter, a successful lawyer, featured in the local paper. It swells when Tom Riley's son sends him postcards from his volunteer work in Africa. My son? My David sends out shockwaves of mysterious bangs and the persistent smell of solder and something vaguely like burnt hope. I remember him as a boy, bright-eyed, always taking things apart, radios, clocks, my poor, unsuspecting toaster, just to see how they worked. He'll be an engineer, Arthur, my late husband, used to say with a proud ruffle of David's hair. Arthur himself had a quiet passion for old mechanisms, for strange antiques he'd pick up at flea markets or dusty estate sales, believing they held forgotten stories. The garage, before it became David's domain, had housed Arthur's own collection of potential projects, mostly unfinished. An engineer. That had been Arthur's dream for him. Now, the only thing David seemed to be engineering was a permanent state of parental despair and a collection of rusting metal that threatened to spill onto the driveway. Last week, it was the annual Havenwood Ladies' Auxiliary Brunch. Carol Perkins, bless her gossipy heart, had cornered me by the cheese puffs. And David, dear, she'd chirped, her eyes a little too bright. Still, finding himself? He's an innovator, Carol, I'd replied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Working on several groundbreaking projects. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Groundbreaking? The only thing he was breaking was my patience and, occasionally, a window pane in the garage with some ill-aimed contraption. The shame of it was a constant dull ache. My friends offered sympathetic smiles, but I saw the pity in their eyes, the silent judgment. Poor Margaret. Such a bright woman. Such a disappointment of a son. I loved David. Of course, I loved him. A fierce, primal love that ached in my chest even as frustration simmered. But love, I was learning, didn't pay the bills. Love didn't build a future. And love certainly didn't explain what on earth he was doing in that garage all day, emerging only for meals, reeking faintly of oil and oblivion, to occasionally ask, with a hopeful, boyish grin that tore at my heart, if I had any spare 9-volt batteries, or to offer an observation completely detached from my inner turmoil. Just yesterday, he'd surfaced for lunch, blinked at the sunlight as if it were a foreign concept, and said, "The squirrels in the oak tree are building a surprisingly complex nest this year, Mom. Really intricate." Then, he'd shoveled down his sandwich and retreated back to his metallic cacophony. Intricate. The irony was almost too much to bear. No. Enough was enough. That garage wasn't just full of junk, of discarded dreams and half-finished disasters. It was a monument to my son's wasted potential, to my own long, sleepless nights filled with a gnawing anxiety that had become my closest companion. And I decided, with a sigh that felt as though it could bring the whole house down around us, it was time for a major intervention. A thorough, ruthless clear-out. The garage. And perhaps, I thought with a sudden, chilling resolve that was part despair, part desperate hope, David's seemingly useless life along with it. Saturday morning dawned with a steely resolve I hadn't felt in years. Coffee first, then war. My chosen battlefield, the garage. My unsuspecting enemy, my own son, David, who probably thought my sudden declaration of a grand clear-out was just another of my fleeting organizational whims. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the sigh that threatened to escape. My shoulders felt heavier under the weight of this determination, but I told myself I had to be firm. I could feel my jaw clench slightly as I marched towards the garage door. He was already there, tinkering with some metallic monstrosity, humming off-key. He looked up, surprised, as I threw open the doors, revealing the chaotic landscape within. "Morning, Mom," he said, a smear of grease on his cheek. "Big plans for the day?" "David," I began, my voice carefully neutral, though a familiar heat was already beginning to smolder in my chest. "This isn't a museum of lost causes or a laboratory for your flights of fancy. It's a garage, and it's going to be cleaned. Today. Thoroughly." His smile faltered. "Cleaned? But Mom, these are my projects. You don't understand. Projects." He called this chaotic graveyard of rusted metal, tangled wires, and components cannibalized from long-dead appliances projects. I called it 2 decades of enabling, 2 decades of my hopes slowly corroding alongside his treasures. "I understand that I can no longer park my car in here, David," I said, gesturing towards a mountain of what looked like discarded robot parts. "I understand that this collection is a fire hazard and an eyesore." The battle lines were drawn. For every item I deemed trash, which was, in my estimation, about 98% of the garage's contents, David had a defense, a passionate, often convoluted, explanation of its hidden potential. "But Mom, this alternator," he'd cry, clutching a greasy, heavy lump. "If I just rewire the flux capacitor, well, not a real flux capacitor, obviously, but the equivalent I'm building, it could power a small village. Or at least a very efficient toaster oven." Each explanation, each hopeful gleam in his eye as he pointed to some rusted spring or defunct motor, made my head throb a little more. A weary fatigue, born of years of these same circular arguments, began to seep from the back of my neck down to my fingertips. Just when I thought I'd won a small victory, convincing him that a particularly gnarled piece of copper tubing was beyond salvation, destined, I'd declared, for the recycling bin, he'd suddenly exclaim, "Wait. I just realized. If I straighten this section and combine it with the gears from that old clock Arthur brought home, it could be the regulator for the atmospheric condenser." An atmospheric condenser I was fairly certain existed only in his vivid imagination. It was an exhausting, never-ending cycle of improbable justifications. "And this," he'd exclaim next, holding up a bicycle while missing half its spokes. "With a few modifications and the motor from that old blender you were throwing out, this could be a personal wind turbine. Free electricity, Mom. Free, except for the cost to my sanity." Under a dusty, moth-eaten tarp, half hidden behind what looked suspiciously like a disemboweled washing machine that had lost a fight with a lawnmower, I found it, his first toolbox. A cheap, bright red plastic thing Arthur had given him for his 8th birthday. Its contents, a few bent nails, a surprisingly intact magnifying glass, a couple of unidentifiable cogs, brought an unexpected, sharp pang to my heart. A soft, sorrowful sensation bloomed for a moment, making my throat tighten. I saw him again, age 10, hair sticking up in a halo of static, eyes wide with the thrill of some minor, fizzing explosion he'd concocted with his chemistry set. When had that innocent, boundless curiosity curdled into this hoarding of broken things, this relentless pursuit of improbable inventions that never quite materialized? The clear-out slowed to a crawl. My resolve wavered with each unearthed memory, each desperate plea from David. "Not that one, Mom. That's a first-edition circuit board from a '78 Synthestar. They don't make them like this anymore. Please, not the collection of vacuum tubes. I need those for the Chronos stabilizer." His voice grew hoarse. His shoulders slumped. He looked, for all his 32 years, like a small boy about to have his most cherished toys confiscated. And then we reached the far corner. The darkest, most cluttered part of the garage, a space I usually avoided as if it radiated some low-level despair. I recognized it then, with a shiver that had nothing to do with the garage's damp chill. The promising heap of scrap Arthur had brought home from the Blackwood Manor estate sale, years before he passed. He'd muttered something then about a reclusive Havenwood inventor and lost music. At the time, I'd seen only a pile of inert metal, one more of his countless acquisitions. After he was gone, it had lain there, gathering dust, until David, with that inherited, insatiable curiosity, had begun to notice it, to spend hours hunched over it. He tensed, visibly, as I approached it. "No, Mom. Not that. Anything but that." It was larger than the rest, a misshapen hulk of tarnished brass and intricately wound copper coils, covered in strange, spidery etchings I didn't recognize, yet which stirred a faint, unsettling familiarity. It wasn't carelessly tossed aside like much of the other detritus. It was covered with a faded velvet cloth, almost reverently. It looked like a failed steampunk experiment, a relic from a forgotten inventor's fever dream, something dredged from a Victorian madman's attic. "This one, Mom." David's voice was tight, almost a whisper, his usual nonchalant, rambling explanations gone, replaced by a raw, desperate plea that resonated with an unfamiliar intensity. "This isn't junk. This is the one. Just give me a little more time with this one. Please." My hand, holding a heavy-duty trash bag that was already groaning under the weight of his lesser treasures, paused. I felt the tension in every muscle of it as I stared at the raw hope, the sheer desperation in David's eyes. Against all reason, against years of ingrained frustration and bitter disappointment, that tiny, unwelcome spark from the day before, the one I'd tried so hard to douse, flickered again. Curiosity? Or was it just the last, exhausted ember of a mother's undying, exasperating hope? My breath caught in my chest. I looked from the strange machine, Arthur's forgotten project, to my son's pleading face, and for the first time that day, my resolve wavered. I don't know why I relented. Perhaps it was the uncharacteristic desperation in David's voice that morning, a raw, pleading crack in his usual veneer of oblivious optimism. Or maybe it was the ghost of Arthur, his quiet enthusiasm for this promising heap of scrap, that stayed my hand. That tiny, unwelcome spark of something had refused to be entirely extinguished by decades of maternal exasperation. The monstrosity, as I still privately termed it, stayed. For now, it sat in the far corner of the garage, covered again by its faded velvet shroud, a silent, hulking question mark in the landscape of my son's life, and increasingly in mine. The following days fell into a strange new rhythm. I'd busy myself in the house, trying to ignore the renewed symphony of clinks, whirs, and occasional frustrated sighs emanating from the garage. But my feet, as if having a will of their own, would often find me by the kitchen window, the one that overlooked his domain. He didn't know I was watching. And what I saw in those stolen glances began to chip away at the fortress of my disapproval, stone by reluctant stone. I saw a David I hadn't seen in years, if ever. Gone was the aimless drifter, the dreamer of impossible schemes. In his place was a craftsman, an artisan of the discarded. He'd sit for hours, a jeweler's loupe pressed to one eye, meticulously cleaning a tiny cog with a soft brush, or patiently soldering a delicate wire with hands that were surprisingly steady. He handled those twisted, tarnished pieces of metal with a reverence, a focused intensity that was almost beautiful. In his concentration, I saw a flicker of Arthur, hunched over a broken clock, determined to understand its secrets. A sudden, unexpected pang of sorrow, of understanding, lanced through me. Had I been too quick to judge, too focused on what I wanted David to be, that I'd forgotten to see who he was, what he was trying to do? Was this obsession? Or was it art? Or something else entirely, something for which I had no name? The line I was beginning to see was perhaps thinner, more permeable, than I'd ever imagined. He'd mutter to himself, a stream of technical jargon I couldn't decipher, torsion ratios, harmonic resonance, galvanic coupling. He'd consult sheaves of brittle, hand-drawn schematics that looked as ancient as the machine itself, his brow furrowed in concentration. This wasn't just idle tinkering. This was research of a very peculiar kind. The spidery etchings on the brass casing of the machine, the ones that had snagged my attention, continued to puzzle me. They felt familiar, in a distant, unsettling way. I spent an afternoon in the dusty silence of Arthur's old study, pulling down aged books on local history and obscure inventors. One slim volume about a reclusive 19th-century Havenwood clockmaker named Silas Blackwood, the same name from the estate sale where Arthur had found the machine, was rumored to have dabbled in automata that could capture moonlight and echo the wind song. The book described similar intricate scrollwork on his creations. It also hinted at Blackwood's extreme reclusiveness, suggesting his extraordinary inventions came with a subtle toll, a detachment from the everyday world, an obsession that bordered on self-neglect. The phrase subtle toll echoed in my mind, casting a somber shadow over the image of the brilliant inventor and, uncomfortably, over my son bent over his own strange device. Days turned into a week. The rest of the garage remained a testament to my failed purge, but that far corner had become a kind of sacred space, David its devoted, grease-stained acolyte. My patience, however, was not infinite. Another day wasted, Margaret, I told myself one late afternoon, watching him hunched over the machine, seemingly no closer to whatever it was he was trying to achieve. The clockmaker's wind song felt like a fanciful tale, far removed from the reality of my son's dusty endeavors. Perhaps it's time to put an end to this particular brand of foolishness. For both your sakes. My resolve hardened. I would give him until morning. Then, the velvet shroud would become a trash bag. He must have sensed my waning tolerance. That evening, as I was about to call him for dinner, a different sound emerged from the garage. Not the usual clatter, but a series of sharp, distinct clicks, followed by a low, protesting groan of ancient gears coming to life. Then, silence. A heavy, final silence. David slumped over the machine, his shoulders shaking. Defeated. My heart, predictably, sank with a familiar thud of "I told you so," mingled with a weary, reluctant ache for his dashed hopes. Another dead end. Another dream turned to dust. But then, a tiny, almost imperceptible blue spark flickered deep within the machine's core. Then another. And another. It was followed by a soft, melodic hum, a sound so unexpectedly pure, so exquisitely beautiful, it seemed to vibrate the very dust motes in the garage air, making them dance like miniature stars. The light within the machine pulsed in time with the hum, a soft, ethereal blue. The wind song captured moonlight. The phrases from the old book about Silas Blackwood's automata flashed in my mind. David stared, his mouth agape, his face illuminated by the machine's gentle, pulsing blue light. And I simply forgot to breathe. That pile of useless junk, Arthur's forgotten project, wasn't just working. It was singing. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw not my failure of a son, but a glimpse of the boy who had once looked at a broken toaster and seen possibilities. A boy who, perhaps, had just coaxed a forgotten song from the very heart of silence, a song his father had only dreamed of hearing. The blue light faded, the ethereal hum died away, leaving a silence in the garage more profound, more charged than any that had come before. David and I just stared at the machine, then at each other, speechless. Had we imagined it? That brief, celestial song? Or had that hulking monstrosity of brass and wire, Arthur's forgotten folly, truly awakened, sung a melody from a forgotten century? David was the first to move, his earlier defeat forgotten. He approached the machine cautiously, reverently, his fingers tracing the intricate etchings. "It worked, Mom," he breathed, his voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated joy. It actually worked. The harmonic resonator. I think I finally calibrated it right. Dad would have loved this. He began to explain, a torrent of technical terms and theories about sympathetic vibrations and archaic energy sources that mostly went over my head. But this time, I didn't hear flights of fancy. I heard passion. I heard knowledge. And, for the first time, I truly listened. After several more successful, albeit equally brief, performances from the machine over the next few days, each one filling the dusty garage with that haunting, beautiful sound, David, with a newfound, hesitant confidence, suggested we show it to someone. Show whom, David? I asked, the old anxieties stirring, though a new, unfamiliar emotion was beginning to bubble beneath them. Another of your potential investors who will promise the moon and deliver only more disappointment? My voice, I realized, lacked its usual acerbic bite. The image of the singing machine, the pure, unalloyed happiness on David's face, had begun to erode years of ingrained skepticism. No, Mom, he said, actually meeting my gaze. I was thinking, Mr. Abernathy, at the County Historical Society. He knows about old things, especially local inventors like Silas Blackwood. Maybe he'll know what Dad was trying to restore, actually is. Mr. Alistair Abernathy, renowned in the county as a leading expert on local inventors, particularly the life and notoriously obscure works of Silas Blackwood, was a man who looked as though he'd been personally exhumed from a Victorian novel. Tall, gaunt, with a perpetually skeptical arch to one eyebrow and spectacles perched precariously on the very tip of his long nose. He surveyed David, then me, then the velvet-shrouded machine we'd carefully transported to his cluttered, book-lined office, with an air of profound weariness, as if we were merely the latest in a long line of local eccentrics wasting his valuable time. Another perpetual motion machine, I presume, he'd sighed, before David had even finished his tentative explanation. Or perhaps a revolutionary new energy source, built from discarded lawnmower parts? David flushed, but stood his ground. It makes music, sir. And light. I think it's very old. My father, he acquired it from the Blackwood Manor estate sale, years ago. Mr. Abernathy's eyebrow climbed another millimeter. Indeed, the Blackwood collection. Arthur Donovan bought several, intriguing, if incomplete, pieces. Most remained mysteries. With trembling hands, David removed the velvet cloth. Mr. Abernathy peered at the machine, poked a coil with a long, bony finger and sniffed disdainfully. Then, David, after a deep breath, gently touched a sequence of the spidery etchings. The now familiar clicks. The groan of gears. And then, the song. That pure, otherworldly hum, filling the dusty office, the blue light pulsing softly from within the machine's core. Mr. Abernathy froze. His spectacles slid down his nose, unnoticed. His mouth, a moment before a thin line of bored disapproval, fell slightly agape. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by something I could only describe as reverence. He leaned closer, then closer still, his breath fogging the tarnished brass. Impossible, he murmured. These etchings, they match Blackwood's private sketches for the second resonator, the one thought lost forever. When the song faded, he didn't speak for a long moment. He just stared, his fingers tracing the etchings with a newfound respect. Remarkable, he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. He turned to David, his eyes wide. Young man, do you have any idea what you've restored? This isn't just an antique. This is Silas Blackwood's lost masterpiece. He explained then. It was, he confirmed, the unique harmonic resonator and light emitter, one of only two ever created by Silas Blackwood. A marvel of forgotten craftsmanship and arcane acoustic principles. The other known example was in a private collection in Geneva, insured for a sum that made my head spin. The appraiser Mr. Abernathy later called in, a brisk, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, confirmed his assessment after a thorough examination. The historical and artistic value is undeniable, Mr. Donovan, she stated, adjusting her own glasses. But what's truly fascinating, from a scientific perspective, is the principle behind its sound and light generation. It's an incredibly efficient energy conversion method, Based on resonant frequencies Blackwood was exploring, something modern physics is only just beginning to explore in theoretical models. If this could be understood, replicated, the implications are quite significant, far beyond a mere museum piece. She then named a figure for David's restoration that made my own hand tremble, not with despair this time, but with a dizzying, disbelieving joy. My son, my failure of a son, the boy who lived in a world of rust and rejected dreams, had just unearthed, no, resurrected, a treasure his father had only glimpsed. And it wasn't just about the money, though God knows, that was a sum that could change both our lives. It was the quiet awe in Ms. Albright's voice when she spoke of implications. It was the look on David's face, not triumph, not greed, but a quiet, profound satisfaction. The look of an artist, an inventor who has finally brought his vision to life and, perhaps, stumbled upon something far greater. Later that evening, as the news of David's remarkable invention, Mr. Abernathy had apparently been quite enthusiastic on the phone to several interested parties, including the local university's physics department. Began to ripple through Havenwood's surprisingly efficient grapevine. My own phone rang. It was Carol Perkins. "Margaret, dear," she gushed, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "I just heard the most fascinating news about your David. Such a clever boy. I always knew he had something special about him." I held the phone away from my ear, a small, wry smile playing on my lips. The world, it seemed, had a very short memory for wasted potential when treasure, in whatever form, was involved. But as I listened to Carol's effusive and entirely insincere praise, a different thought surfaced, quiet and a little sad. It wasn't just the world that had a short memory. Perhaps, I realized with a pang of old regret, I had too. The singing machine had broken more than just the silence of our garage. It had shattered the quiet anonymity of our lives. Suddenly, our phone was ringing off the hook, a cacophony of voices, some curious, some demanding, and not all of them as cloyingly sweet as Carol Perkins's had been. Local newspaper reporters wanted interviews. University professors requested viewings. And then came the calls from people with smoother voices and sharper suits, collectors, tech scouts, even a representative from a rather aggressive venture capital firm, Innovate Corp., with a very impressive-sounding, multi-million-dollar offer. Fame, even the small town, peculiar kind that revolved around a resurrected 19th-century musical automaton, was a fickle, disorienting beast. I worried it might devour the quiet, tinkering boy I was only just beginning to see again, the one who seemed more bewildered by the sudden fuss than elated. David, for his part, seemed mostly overwhelmed. He'd answer the phone with a polite confusion, listen patiently to grand pronouncements about patents and market potential, then retreat to the garage, back to the machine itself, as if seeking solace in its familiar hum and intricate workings. The money, the accolades, they seemed to wash over him, leaving him largely untouched. His treasure was not in its monetary value, but in its song, in the miracle of its reawakening, in understanding how Silas Blackwood had achieved such a feat. "They don't get it, do they, Mom?" he'd said once, after a particularly insistent call from a man who wanted to reverse engineer its core principles for mass application. It's not about application in that way. It's about the mystery, the elegance of the design. It was strange, watching people who once dismissed David as a harmless eccentric, a boy lost in his own world of rust and daydreams, now speak his name with a new, almost breathless respect. Success, it seemed, was a powerful pair of spectacles, altering everyone's vision of the wearer. I found myself fielding calls, acting as an impromptu and highly unqualified press secretary. I learned to discern the genuine interest from the purely avaricious. And with each conversation, a small, quiet shift occurred within me. The old shame, the years of quiet apology for my son's unconventional path, began to recede, replaced by a fierce, protective pride. He wasn't a failure. He was an artist, a discoverer, a restorer of forgotten wonders. And the world, it turned out, was finally beginning to listen to his peculiar music. The most significant offer, the one from Innovate Corp., came with a team, all sharp suits and sharper smiles, who spoke of synergy and disruptive technology. The sum they offered could have bought half of Havenwood and secured our financial futures for generations. The catch, of course, was significant: exclusive rights, the machine itself for their R&D labs, which sounded suspiciously like dissection to me, and David as a highly valued consultant, a well-paid, undoubtedly golden handcuffed cog in their vast corporate machine. They wanted to replicate it, mass-produce simplified versions, democratize its harmonic principles for the wellness market. It sounded both impressive and horrifying. "It's an incredible opportunity, David," I'd said that evening, the glossy contract papers spread out on our kitchen table, a stark white testament to a future I could never have imagined for him. My voice was carefully neutral, but a part of me, the part that had worried about leaky roofs and unpaid bills for years, the part that had seen Arthur work himself to an early grave, couldn't help but feel a thrill of possibility, of security. This was it. The success I'd secretly, and sometimes not so secretly, yearned for him. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the complex legal jargon, his fingers drumming softly on the table. Then he looked up, not at the contract, but at me. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, his brow furrowed with a genuine concern that made my heart ache with a sudden rush of love. "This is a lot. For both of us. All this noise." That small, unexpected question, that flicker of empathy for my overwhelm, disarmed me more than any grand gesture could have. He wasn't just thinking of himself or the machine. He was thinking of me. He didn't choose the Innovate Corp offer. He didn't choose the eccentric billionaire collector who wanted to display the resonator like a trophy in a climate-controlled vault. Instead, after much quiet deliberation, after several long walks along the Havenwood shore, often returning with pockets full of smooth stones and a clearer look in his eyes, he chose a modest research grant from the local university's small, underfunded Department of Historical Technologies. Mr. Abernathy had helped arrange it. It offered far less money, a cramped lab space shared with a dusty collection of ancient looms, but something far more valuable to David: the freedom to simply understand, to study the machine, to learn from it, to perhaps, one day, coax more of its forgotten songs into the world, not for profit, but for the sheer, quiet joy of discovery and preservation. I admit, for a fleeting moment, as he explained his decision, I felt a pang of, what? Disappointment? The practical mother in me, the one who knew the value of a secure future, the one who had seen Arthur's dreams often curtailed by lack of funds, had a brief, silent argument with the woman who was slowly, achingly, learning to see her son for the remarkable individual he truly was. "It was never about being rich, Mom," he said then, as if sensing my internal conflict, his eyes clear and steady. "It was never about patents or mass production. It was about listening to the music. Its music. And figuring out how Silas Blackwood made it sing after all this time. Dad would have understood that. And in that moment, watching the quiet conviction on his face, I knew. My son, the boy I'd once privately and sometimes not so privately labeled a failure, had finally, truly, found his own, unique symphony. And it was more beautiful, more resonant, than any I could have ever orchestrated or even dared to dream, for him. The subtle toll Silas Blackwood had written of in that old book, perhaps it wasn't a curse or a tragic detachment. Perhaps it was just the price of hearing a song no one else could, and the quiet courage it took to truly listen. Time, like a skilled clockmaker, had slowly, meticulously recalibrated the rhythm of our Havenwood home. The tense silences, the heavy sighs of my disappointment, they were largely gone. In their place, a peculiar, rather lovely symphony had emerged, The familiar clatter and whir of metal from the garage, now often interspersed with my own surprised laughter as I botched a new sourdough recipe, and sometimes, just sometimes, the pure, ethereal notes from David's singing machine, a gentle reminder that magic can, indeed, sprout in the most unexpected of junkyards. Have you ever truly listened to the symphony of change in your own home? The subtle shifts in its daily music? David's garage was no longer just his hermitage. It had, improbably, become a neighborhood curiosity, then a sort of informal learning space. A couple of curious kids from down the street had started hanging around, watching him with wide eyes as he coaxed life back into discarded gadgets. He'd even patiently shown young Timmy Henderson how to fix his broken remote-controlled car. He wasn't just tinkering anymore. He was, in his own quiet way, sharing. Another lucrative offer had come through for the harmonic resonator, this one from a German research institute. David had politely declined. Their melody is all about patents and proprietary algorithms, Mom, he'd explained, a small, knowing smile on his face. Mine's still a bit off-key, but it's honest. The true value I was finally understanding wasn't in what you owned or what you could sell it for. It was in what you created and who you became in the process of creating it. Passion wasn't just a hobby. It was a language, a way to connect, to make sense of the beautiful, baffling chaos of things. And Margaret? Well, Margaret was finally beginning to explore her own blank canvas. I'd spent a lifetime trying to paint a picture of success for David, forgetting that I, too, had an easel gathering dust, waiting for new colors. I enrolled in a beginner's Spanish class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I even started a small blog, writing about Havenwood's hidden histories, its quirky characters. It turned out the treasure wasn't just in David's garage. It was hidden in the neglected corners of my own soul, waiting to be unearthed, polished, and shared. I found myself looking at other eccentrics in town, not with judgment, but with a newfound curiosity, a nascent understanding. Who knew what symphonies they were composing in their own private garages? One evening, David found me on the porch, sketching the way the sunset painted the salt marshes gold. "That's a new tune for you, Mom," he said, sitting beside me. Trying to find the right notes, I admitted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, sometimes the most broken things make the most interesting sounds. You just have to listen closely enough, be patient enough to hear their story." We sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the crickets begin their nightly chorus, two very different musicians composing our own, finally harmonious, lives. The late afternoon sun still slants into the open garage, illuminating dust motes dancing around David and, occasionally, a curious child or two. He looks up, catches my eye from across the yard, and gives me that old, familiar, hopeful grin, but this time, it's not asking for 9-volt batteries or a stay of execution for some beloved piece of scrap. It's sharing a quiet, earned joy. I smile back. The clatter and hum from the garage still fill the air, but now it's the rhythm of a life, of several lives, being meticulously, joyfully, put back together, piece by improbable piece. His, and in many ways, mine too. The garage door, once a barrier of my frustration and his retreat, now stands wide open, an invitation to creativity, to possibility. I used to think success had only one shape, one narrow, pre-approved path. I used to try and clear out what I didn't understand, what didn't fit my carefully constructed expectations, only to realize finally that sometimes the scraps we dismiss, the off-key notes we try to silence, are the most vital, most beautiful parts of a person's unique symphony. Perhaps in each of us, in our own metaphorical garages, there are hidden passions, undiscovered treasures, unique melodies waiting to be sung. Maybe you're looking at the garage of your child, your loved one, or even your own, with an eye full of doubt, of frustration, of a desire to just clear it all out. So I wonder if today you tried to open your heart just a little wider, the way I finally learned to open that garage door and my own stubborn heart, what might you discover? What unexpected symphony might your life, or the lives of those you love, begin to play? Share with me, and with others, your hidden treasures, your off-key passions, or how you found the melody in what once seemed like just noise. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give ourselves and each other isn't a pre-drawn map to success. It's the courage to listen, the patience to wait, and the wisdom to cherish the most beautiful notes when they finally, in their own way, at their own time, choose to sing. And that, perhaps, is the greatest treasure of all.